First reading today comes from the third chapter of the book of Ezra, verses 10 to 13. When the builders laid the foundation of the temple of the Lord, the priests in their vestments were stationed to praise the Lord with trumpets, and the Levites, the sons of Asaph, with cymbals, according to the directions of King David of Israel. And they sang responsively, praising and giving thanks to the Lord, for he is good, for his steadfast love endures forever towards Israel. And all the people responded with a great shout when they praised the Lord, because the foundation of the house of the Lord was laid. But many of the priests and Levites and heads of families, old people who had seen the first house on its foundations, wept with a loud voice when they saw this house, though many shouted aloud for joy, so that the people could not distinguish the sound of joyful shout from the sound of the people's weeping, for the people shouted so loudly that their sound was heard far away. Our second reading is Psalm 55. O God, hear my prayer. Do not ignore my pleas. Hear me, answer me. My mind is tortured and I am distraught at the sound of my enemies, at their vicious oppression. They engulf me with their treachery and assault me in anger. My heart is tortured inside me. Terrors of death assail me. Fear and trembling invade me. Horror overwhelms me. So I said, if only I had the wings of a dove, then I'd fly away and find rest. Yes, I'd fly far away and find rest in the desert. I'd hurry to my place of refuge, far from this raging wind and storm. Confound them, Adonai, confuse their speech, for I see nothing but violence and strife in the city. Day and night they prowl its borders, malice and trouble roam its streets. Violence fills the city, fraud and deceit never leave its marketplace. For it is not an enemy who reviles me, I could bear that. It is not a foe who taunts me, or I could find and be safe. No, it is you, my other self, my companion, my bosom friend. We who together held sweet communion, we walked to God's house amid the festive throng. Let destruction seize them without warning. Let Sheol swallow them alive, for corruption will make its home with them wherever they are. As for me, I will call on God, and God will save me. Evening, morning, and noon, I lament and groan, and my liberator hears my voice. God ransoms me whole from those who wage war against me. Though many oppose me, God will hear me and overthrow them, the one who has reigned from the beginning. Because they will never change. They have no reverence for God. And you, my former friend, you even attack your soulmates and you violate your covenant with them. Your talk is as smooth as butter, but in your heart there is war. The words are more soothing than oil, yet they conceal the drawn sword. Cast your burden on God, who will sustain you, and will never allow the righteous to be overthrown. But God will bring down your enemies to the pit of destruction. Those murderous deceivers will not live out half their days. Adonai, I will trust you.
Coming off the success of shows that no one knows the names of anymore, The book writer, Joseph Stein, composer Jerry Brock, and lyricist Sheldon Harnick walked into the office of producer Harold Prince, who had come off the success of West Side Story, something everyone still has heard of. And they proposed turning Russian Jewish author Shalom, I practiced this, Lyceum's short tragedy to comedy stories of Tevye, the milkman. Am I missing pages? Into a musical. Prince added the director and choreographer to his team, which only matters because when he joined the team, the story goes that after joining the team, Robbins repeatedly asked, "But what show about?" And the replies repeated the plot, and he would say, "I don't know what it is about, but it is not about that." And finally, in a moment of frustration, Harnick yelled, "For God's sake, Jerry, it's about tradition." And Robbins replied, "That's it, right about that." And so the Fiddler on the opening number was 4. And Fiddler on the Roof would go on to win 9 awards. And a Tevye, and a Tevka, and a Tev. Yep. In Russia. Tevye and Gold have 5 daughters, Goldie, have 5 daughters, and the 3 oldest, I added the name at the last minute, Zetzel, Hodel, and Java are of the marrying age. Tevye is a poor milkman, and while he dreams of wealth, he does not have much, which means he doesn't have much of a dowry to give for his daughters. So he can't be as picky as he'd like to be for his daughters. And there are traditions, the ways things are done, like marriages are always arranged through a matchmaker. Tevye's in the very first lines include a fiddler on the roof. It sounds crazy, no? But on our little village of Anatevka, you might say each one of us is a fiddler on the roof trying to scratch out a pleasant, simple tune without breaking his neck. It isn't easy. You may ask, why do we stay up there if it's so dangerous? We stay because Anatevka is our home. And how do we keep our hours? That I can tell you in one word, tradition. And then you sing the song. Now, the problem is his 3 daughters refuse the matchmaker's match, and they end up marrying for love, marrying a revolutionary, and marrying a Christian. Now, Tevye was able to fit the first 2 in his worldview and traditions as he understood them, but marrying outside of the faith, well, that was too much. And Tevye refused to even look at his daughter Hevye for the most of the last portion of the show. Ooh, I lost my spot. Now, people are changing in the story. Women's places and roles are changing. Traditions are changing. Marrying for love is a change. And in the background of this story is the incredible unrest in Russia. Different czar leaders would give the Jewish communities less or more freedom. But they had been relegated to these towns known as the Pale on the western part of Russia. In 1905, the revolution was boring. Tsar Nicholas was about 12 years from him and his family being executed. And the show ends with someone that Tevye thought was a friend coming in, crashing his daughter's wedding, and telling them they had to leave Anatevya. and in a last moment, wish the blessings of God on his youngest daughter. As they leave, the fiddler from the roof follows them, playing. Perhaps there is still beauty in the next part of their life, even as these traditions are changing. Perhaps there will still be beauty in the next things that come. Perhaps they will find new traditions and new ways to balance. The community that rebuilt the temple in Ezra were the people that had come back from exile in Babylon, and probably some who had been left in Jerusalem. Some were young enough when they were exiled that they remembered what the temple looked like before. Others were brand new. So when the congregation gathered at the new temple, this is a simulation of Herod's temple, which would be way later and more. They were full of complicated and conflicting feelings. And I wonder, when into planning the temple, the Bible tells us that they followed the instructions that had been used by Solomon, that had been given to them by God through Moses, and that seemed most important, that the thing that they wanted to carry forward, what mattered when they built the temple, it was the altar and the items. They did only what mattered most, at least according to some. Because some of them remembered the way that it had been, the grandness of the old temple, the gold and the cedars that they had brought in from countries far away, the beauty, how it shone on the hill. Now, I went to Rome in seminary, and it was mostly to look at history and a lot to look at churches. We looked at so many churches. And the very first one we went into was the Basilica of Saint Maria. And it is beautiful, it shines, but it's a little hard to look at that first shipment of gold from the New World without remembering all of the other history of Christopher Columbus and what he did in the New World, of the slaves and rape and violence, of civilizations destroyed and cultures vanished, of generations affected by their colonizers. The big, beautiful, shiny ceiling carries a bit of devastation with it. And while there were those standing at the temple in grief for what had been and what they ended up with instead, there were many people, maybe generations before, who would have known and heard stories of the slaves that were used to build the first temple, and of the compromises that were made with neighboring countries to bring the resources in to make it as beautiful as it was, and of the people who went hungry for the taxes to accumulate the wealth of the powerful at the expense of the poor and the hungry. So when it came time to build the new temple, they didn't do it the same. Maybe they took time to think about things, to consider who they were going to be this time, what the temple was going to be for. Maybe it was a less extravagant temple by choice and not by a sad consequence. I wonder if they spent some time with reading the rituals and the instructions and tried to figure out what was most important. They tried to figure out which traditions was going to be part of their world. Jesuit scholar Edward Yarnold reminds us of this living dimension of tradition, that it is not handed on tablets of stone for the guidance of every age. In this process of tradition, the act of applying the word to situation becomes itself part of the tradition. Oops. What the church proclaims today becomes in its turn part of the reservoir of memory on which tomorrow's proclamations draw. Now, in many ways, too far. The church universal, if you read the headlines and pay attention to different things, if you fall into some catastrophizing, the church universal isn't in rubble, but at the very least it might be rebuilding. Maybe the church universal over the years got caught up too much in power and wealth, in the gold ceilings or the best building or the newest tech. Maybe the church universal is caught up in the best shoes and the fancy, being cool, and the best shoes and the fancy haircut and the coolest guitars. Maybe the church universal was caught up too much in the right thing, in this right song, the right interpretation, in the last traditions. Maybe there's a way that the church got wrapped too much in capitalism and in the empire and in empire building. So I wonder what you would say are the things that you would rebuild. What base level, what would you want to carry forward from the past? What should we build and what should we let go of? What traditions might we want to hold on to and pass on to generations to come? And what might we want to say goodbye to? What are the traditions that are worth passing on? What are we willing to stand strong in? And where are we willing to bend? Tevye in our story learned to bend, and it didn't break him. Despite what he thought at the beginning, little traditions and little changes, and he was allowed to bend. I wonder what are the traditions that we might have and might keep and might adjust to keep our balance in a world that always seems to be changing around us. So,